Right now, you'd go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. What a weekend it had been. The Unite the Right rallies. Nobody bothered to show up on the right. I was expecting hundreds. I was expecting thousands. I was expecting somebody not so much. And it's one of those things where you just got to go, not so much, not happening so much whatsoever. Counter protests, a couple thousand people showed up to shout them down and, well, to put them in their place. And that's a good thing. We'll talk about that today. Lots of stuff today. The prosecution wrapped up in the Manafort trial. Trump and the wacky Omarosa, just tons and tons of stuff that I want to get to. But first, on Friday, we had David Pakman on the show. He's a nationally syndicated radio host, does a TV program on free speech like we do. Decent guy. I like David. I've known him for years. And I thought we had a really good conversation. Got a little hung up on trade, a little minor disagreement. And I had a bunch of people emailing me, basically saying that I surrendered on trade and that I was wrong. See, all you care about are those jobs. I go, yeah, your point. And it got me to thinking over the weekend that we've been really brainwashed pretty well. You see the Walmart ads, lower prices, live better. Really? I don't know that that's living better. Buying a bunch of cheap crap that's going to break in a couple of weeks. I don't know that makes my life better. And, virtually everyone who tried to take me to task on the trade issue, because there's part of me that says this is just a reflective, just a reaction to Trump did it. And I've said before, the blind squirrel finds a nut occasionally. And I think, Trump was right on this. He stole the labor message. He knew what the white working class of this country wanted to hear and needed to hear, and I think is the right direction for us to go. And he grabbed onto it. And nobody believed, if we have to relitigate 2016, nobody bought that Hillary was going to be against the TPP. Not even I bought it. Not even a little bit. And this is one of those things where you go, trade matters. And for me, someone who has spent a good portion of the years that I've been doing this, talking about the trade issue and making it a central tenet of where I spend my attention. I've been calling for tariffs for a very long time because our trade deficit is completely out of whack. And the idea that tariffs are the complete answer and it's going to solve is not what I'm saying. At some point, you have to use the carrot and the stick occasionally has to be used. And to put tariffs on, you begin to have the conversations. Now, what I think Trump should be doing differently, because my fear, and I've said this, anyone who listens to this program knows, that one of my great fears is that Trump is right in this and we need to have tariffs on Chinese goods to kind of level things out a little bit is that he's doing it in such a just insane way, in such a backwards, just haphazard way that I don't believe there's really a plan here, that he screws it up for all eternity. And maybe that's part of the plan. I don't understand why we're picking a fight with the Canadians. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why we're picking fights with our allies. We're generally somewhere in the ballpark when it comes to trade deficits with our allies. What we should be doing is reaching out to those allies who they themselves are being crushed by China and saying, look, we need to have more balanced trade. You need to get your people to be consuming more things or buying more of our products, so that there's some balance. But I kept getting this, and every time the email would come in, well, you just want me to pay more for stuff. And I go, well, what good is it? And this was basically my universal response. What good is it to have low prices if you don't have wages, if you don't have a job? What good is it that the widget or whatnot costs 3/4 of what it would cost if it were made here in the U.S. if you don't have the ability to afford it? And I started thinking about, some of the things that, and it was just a, real, quick kind of cursory thought of, some of the things that, I interact with on a daily basis that used to be owned by us, not anymore. I was thinking about taking the kids to a movie over the weekend. There's an AMC theater in our neighborhood. I was going, hey, we go to there. I forgot. They're owned by a Chinese company. The Chinese own them. Not even American movie cinema anymore. You go, if you want to see a movie, Japanese own Sony. They've owned it for a long time. You just go down the list of all of the things that we used to take for granted. I mean, we have a TV, and I tried to find an American-made TV. Good luck. You've got Sony TVs are a South Korean company and Japanese company. You got LG, which is Chinese. You've got GE Appliances, which is Chinese. You can look at all of this stuff. Even something as simple as ice cream. Ben and Jerry's. Ben and freaking Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's owned by a Dutch company. Budweiser owned by a Belgian company. I mean, you can go down the list. 7-Eleven owned by a Japanese company. Gas station, Citgo owned by Venezuela. Shell owned by a Dutch company. BP, British Petroleum, owned by a British company. Trader Joe's owned by a German company. Nestle owned by a German company. Gerber owned by a German company. Bear owned by, it is a German company. I mean, you go down the list of all these things that we go, some of that stuff's classic Americana. You think about the toys of the past, Mattel. You think about Huffy bicycles. You go down the list of all of these things that we grew up with, that you were made in factories in small towns all across this country. Gone, all of them. And I love when people say, we've lost 10 million jobs. I go, we didn't lose any jobs. We know exactly where they are. It's not like we were just walking down the road one day and go, gee, where'd those jobs go? We know exactly where they are. They found their way to cheaper locales. And it's because of our trade policies. And it's because my theory has always been you have open free trade with similar countries that have similar standards of living. The UK, Germany, Canada, your top economic OECD countries. There you have open trade because your living standards are the same. In fact, in most of those countries, our living standard is pulling them down. We're pulling them down because we're trying to compete with desperate nations. We're trying to compete with countries that, use authoritarian means with poverty wages and lax environmental regulations and I'm not going to say no unions because we're breaking them here thanks to the Republican Party. But what you end up having is a country that had a strong, vibrant, prosperous middle class competing with desperation and poverty. And what do you think ended up happening? all of those guys sitting in the corner offices in the CEO suites across this country go, hey, you know, we could move that factory from that plant in Michigan where we're paying those guys 18 or 19 bucks an hour with health care and pensions and paid sick days and vacations and weekends off and 8-hour days and overtime after 40. We could take that and we could move it to, you know, somewhere in China where they're going to heavily subsidize us. And we're not going to have any problems with those workers because if they give us a problem, we'll just get rid of them and bring a whole bunch more in. And they'll work for $1 an hour, vacation, health care, pension, what? They don't have any of that. So you had all of these CEOs who were lining their pockets, moving these jobs. And this is one of the things that drives me insane. You know, you hear people say, well, the union made the company go out of business. The union forced the company out of the country because they asked for too much. And it's one of those things, every time I hear it, my head wants to explode, but I kind of hold it in because no union worker ever made that decision. No union leader ever made that decision. That was the corporate CEO's decision. They decided that, you know what? There's more profit over there. Not that they weren't making a profit here. There used to be this small local department store. It was kind of like on like a Kmart Target level. It was called Clover. And it was one of these places that when I moved to Pennsylvania, it's the only place I'd ever seen it, but it was called Clover. And I forget who the parent company, I think Hess's was the parent company. And I remember they closed the doors, and the newspaper article at the time was interviewing the CEO who said that the company wasn't making an acceptable profit. And it was one of those things you go, wait a second, you were making a profit? How much, what's the acceptable profit? And, you know, because look, it employed hundreds of people. It served as wages for families. You know, it was an anchor in the community. You know, it served the public good. It created jobs. It paid taxes. It did all, and it made a profit, which wasn't acceptable. And they thought they could make more money by moving somewhere else. These are the decisions these CEOs make. And it's no different with manufacturing. So then they go and they use our politicians, thanks Bill Clinton, of which I was never a fan. The neoliberal trade agenda started under Reagan, birthed with Reagan, completely negotiated and put together under H.W. Bush, and finally signed off by Bill Clinton. Create this environment where, you know what? Workers are pliable. Workers are disposable. Factories that had been in communities for decades were now closing up. Factories that had been in communities for, there was, where I live in Pennsylvania, there was Carlisle Tire and Wheel. They had been in the location there for 93 years. Tennessee gave them a huge check. And they up and moved. Following the money. So when I hear people saying, well, tariffs pick winners and losers, and you're going to cause a trade war, let me let you in on a little secret. The working class of this country has been under attack for 50 years. The war has been raging on for 50 plus years. The class war has been raging for 50 years. The trade war is a big part of that. Like it or not, we are engaged in a trade war and we are losing badly. And this is the thing that gets me when people say, well, if you put tariffs on things, it's going to raise the price of things. And you go, okay. And my other favorite, there are no winners in a trade war. Really? That's illogical. There's a winner and there's a loser in most things. Let's say you put a tariff on something that raises the prices 25%. As we know from experience, very often what most companies do is they absorb a big portion of that. They take a little bit less in profit because they don't want their prices to go up and they don't want people to stop consuming. Because if the price goes high, and this is what we know from economic models and all that, the price goes up too high, people stop buying. When people stop buying, the companies stop producing, and you end up having this problem of having overcapacity, and then you have mass layoffs. That is a problem. Nobody wants that. But the other side of the equation is that all the jobs move to China. Nobody has a job left. We have a whole bunch of widgets that nobody has any money to buy. So you have overcapacity and nobody buying it. And guess what? You're in the same scenario. So by admitting that we're in a trade war, and we have been for a very long time, and Trump talked about this in 2015 and 16, and at the time I gave him credit for it. He hasn't done anything positive on it yet. But if you remember, supposedly, according to him, day one, he was going to label China a currency manipulator. That is part of the trade war. By having their currency lower than ours, it makes imports cheaper and our exports more expensive. That's been going on for years. And again, this is part of the problem with having the dollar as the world's currency. And we could go back to, because I've argued we need another Bretton Woods. We need to have another global summit of how we're going to divvy up trade and how it's going to be done. The fact that the dollar is the world's currency, and as I ticked off a number of companies that are owned by companies in foreign lands, that's because of the dollar being the world's currency. Real simple, real quick, not complicated at all. You buy your ice cream from Ben & Jerry's, which is a foreign-owned company. You buy your hamburger from Burger King, which is a foreign-owned company. You buy your bike from Huffy, which foreign-owned company. And you go down the list of all of this stuff where everything you buy. Walk around your house and just pick up things and see where things are made. Almost nothing's made here anymore. So that money, those dollars, they left the country. They went to those companies in those countries. That money has to come back. They're U.S. dollars. So it has to come back. So what do they do with those dollars that we give them for their trinkets? They buy us. They buy our companies. They buy our treasury bonds. They buy all of this stuff. So not only are we losing the jobs, not only are we losing the middle class prosperity that those jobs once brought, we're getting garbage, and we're giving them the money to then turn around and buy us even more. So when I have these conversations, I had a bunch of them because of that little quick, back and forth I had with David on Friday. Something has to be done. I think he's the wrong guy to do it. I think he's going to booger it up, but I'm scared that he's going to screw it up to the point where we never solve the problem, and it only gets worse. But to say that we can never have tariffs and that it's a horrible idea is just flat wrong. I go back to some of the things that happened during the Bretton Woods Accord, and I think it was 1944. John Maynard Keynes came up with an idea of having a global currency. I think he wanted to call it something like the Bancor. I think it's a gold bank or something. I think that's what it stood for. And the idea is that you would have a global currency and everybody else's currency would float against that currency. So much like you have, when you go to Canada, it's like $1.05 or $1.10 and give you in Canadian money for every dollar the U.S. has. Or if someone coming from the UK, they give us 80 cents and we give them $1. The exchange rates are what they are. And you set those with that global currency, and all trade is done in that currency so that no country it has to come back to. And what he wanted was a scenario where you had balanced trade, that there were no absolute winners, there were no absolute losers, that everybody focused on domestic consumption, domestic production, and those things that we wanted to trade or could trade or had to trade, we did. And there was a leveling mechanism. And that leveling mechanism was that there would be no trade deficits. Now, we know that could never really happen. The leveling mechanism was, okay, China's got a $375 billion trade surplus with the U.S. There would be a calculation based on how much their surplus was that they would have to then pay to the U.S. to help level that out. Because we've lost millions of jobs. And we've got millions of factory workers and millions of people who had those jobs and families who depended on that, who then have to get, food stamps and unemployment and, Social Security and, Medicaid, and go down the list of, heating assistance and school lunch programs and all of that stuff just to exist. And that the theory is that you have the winning country pay that to the losing country so that they were balanced. So that it would make things cost a little bit more for the winning country, so that the losing country maybe would bring them up a little bit, so that you would have that leveling, so that you didn't have to deal with desperate nations all the time. And the sad reality is any sense on this is just completely lost. And it's infuriating to me to hear people say, well, it's just going to cost us more. It's already costing us a lot more. We just don't realize it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. You buy the lower price, better life idea? Or do we need to do something to protect ourselves and to protect our industry and to protect our workers? 1-888-520-RICK, 1-888-520-7425. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1892. That was the day miners in Tracy City, Tennessee, rebelled against the state's convict lease system. Miners had been forced to work side by side with convict labor. The convicts, overwhelmingly African American, were forced to live in deplorable stockade conditions. Their presence in the mines served to minimize paid labor, keep wages low, and stunt union organizing throughout the state. Miners demanded that Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad give them the same hours of work as the convicts. When they refused, the miners marched on the stockades where the convicts were housed. They released the convicts and marched them onto trains bound for Nashville, burning the stockades to the ground. The revolt at Tracy City followed armed uprisings of thousands of miners the previous year in nearby Briceville and Coal Creek. Here it is thought that the Knights of Labor leaders led miners to surround stockades, disarm guards, and release convicts onto Knoxville-bound trains over the course of several days. By August of 1892, hundreds of miners would confront state forces in armed shootouts across Grundy, Marion, and Anderson counties, releasing convicts when they could onto trains bound for Nashville. Miners were eventually arrested and convicted, but these revolts would lead the Tennessee General Assembly to end its convict lease system 4 years later, making them one of the first southern states to do so.
Well, they brought in the entire state militia, heavy artillery and Gatling guns.
For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
The newspaper said they won a great victory, handed out medals for their bravery. They got the convicts out of the mines.
Rebuilding America. The Rick Smith Show.
The walls come tumbling down. The walls come crumbling, crumbling. The walls come tumbling, down.
So Tom Steyer, billionaire Tom Steyer, announced today a new national initiative. They're going to spend $10 million to try and get 5.5 million people to vote in the next election. We need every person to get out and cast their ballot. We need every person to stand up, step forward, and speak out the new initiative in conjunction with the need to impeach is now the need to vote. And I absolutely agree. And what they're trying to get people to do is to commit to cast a ballot, commit to doing it right now, commit that you're going to, in the fall, on November 6th, march to the polls and vote. And what's kind of sad to me is that, that someone has to spend, a boatload of money to just try and convince us to do something we should do anyway. Because generally I'm one of the people who says, as my grandfather always said, if a rich guy's going to take a buck out of his pocket to tell you don't need something, you better spend $2 to get it. The same thing in this. If he's going to spend $10 million, I always immediately just viscerally question the motives. Now I know this guy, he's a businessman. He's somebody who I believe has the better interest of the country at heart, and Trump is not that better interest. But still, viscerally, I kind of struggle a little bit with it, just a little bit. And speaking of the moneyed interests, a bus tour is being floated. I guess there's a big bus tour coming. You may remember the Koch brothers, because of the tax scheme that the Republicans rammed through, they spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 million promoting the tax scam. Evidently now, them and their cabal of billionaires that we've created, thank you very much, they're planning on spending upwards of $400 million this election cycle to keep their minions in. And I guess the goal is to hit the road and brainwash the faithful into thinking that the tax cuts that the Republicans rammed through are somehow actually good for working people. Evidently, next week there's going to be a group that fired up called the Job Creators Network. They are launching the tax cut bus tour, going to stop in 33 vulnerable Republican districts and say how wonderful the tax cuts were. Remember, this is just one of those things that, again, back to the money. The Kochs and their ilk are going to spend $400 million this election cycle because of that tax break, because of that tax scheme, because of that ripoff bill. The Koch brothers, just the two of them, pocketed $1.4 billion from that one piece of legislation. So you think about the $20 million they spent promoting it, saying how wonderful it was, and now they'll spend a little bit of that $400 million out of their own pockets. Let's say they were feeling really generous, and they pocketed they out of their pocket spent the whole $400 million. So you're talking $420 million to promote the tax bill and then to defend all the people who voted for it. They still got almost an extra $1 billion. That is in just a little over a year. What? Almost a 300% return on investment? You put up 400, you end up with a 1.4 billion? I mean, it's just remarkable. And it's just, I just sit here and I think about, this bus tour and what they're going to be pushing, about how wonderful this plan is. Now, the 20 million, long gone. They spent all of that. The 400 million is what they're going to spend on this election cycle. So this tour part of that. But you look at this and what's just amazing to me is that there are going to be people who look at what this tax cut did. 83% of every dollar, we know this, 83 cents out of every dollar of the tax cut went to the top 1%. Any pennies that the working class of this country are getting right now go away in the next 10 years. That's the reality. Corporate tax breaks are permanent. The stuff that they did on the estate tax and all the other stuff, done. No sunshine there. The little bit that maybe you or I may have gotten, and I got to tell you, I haven't seen it. And I've yet to find anybody who goes, oh, it's life-changing. I got 38 cents. The reality is we got screwed again. So I'm kind of curious. And I want to hit one of these 33 districts. And over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking about, where they are, because I want to go to one. I want to see what they're going to say, what the argument is for these horrible tax cuts. Because we've seen this movie over and over and over and over again. We've seen it over and over again. We just keep getting robbed blind. The whole neoliberal agenda, really birthed during the Reagan years. More tax cuts for the wealthy, because they're the smart people, right? They know what to do with it. Give them all the money and they'll invest it properly. And I say, yeah, they do. They invest it right. They're smart. They invest it in how to benefit themselves, not society, not you or me. No one's ever given me a job out of the goodness of their heart or their benevolency. They've given me a job because, hey, I can make more money off your labor than if you weren't here. There's the dirty little secret. There's no benevolent employer. There's simply someone who says, you know what? You're worth more to me here than you're not. And the second that you're not worth more to me than you're not, you're not. Seems pretty simple. The day that you cost them money, the day that you're no longer putting money in their pocket, you're no longer there. And it's one of those things where, I'm going to be interested to see where they go with the big tour. So if it's in one of your districts, I would love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Share the thoughts on the big tour. But, the reality is those tax breaks didn't help you or me or any other working person. They helped the billionaires. They helped the big multinational corporations. And sorry, they didn't help Main Street at all. It all went to Wall Street. Quick break. Right back.
Yes, it is all about the truth.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Communists, Reds. Long have these been the cries of the press and politicians seeking to undermine the labor movement in the United States. Sometimes even labor leaders themselves got caught up in the anti-communist hysteria. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1938. That was the day that the president of the Metal Trades Department of the American Federation of Labor, John P. Fry, gave testimony before the Special Committee on Un-American Activities. It was known as the Dies Committee. Texas Congressman Martin Dies Jr. founded the effort to root out an alleged communist threat in the U.S. In his testimony, Fry alleged that there were 300 CIO leaders who were communists. At the time, the AFL and CIO were two separate organizations. The CIO had split off from the AFL to pursue more organizing in industries like automaking and steel. Even after his testimony, Fry maintained a network of operatives in the labor movement to identify suspected communists. A few days after Fry spoke before Congress, the Chicago Tribune ran a story explaining the perceived communist labor threat. The article declared if the communists in the United States continued to operate as the Communist Party, they would have no influence on American foreign policy in the foreseeable future. But by making themselves leaders of labor and therefore powerful in democratic councils, they can be of immediate value to the Soviets. The paper warned that the communists were hoping to march the U.S. into another European war. The public had little appetite for another major conflict. The charge that the CIO was infiltrated by communists who wanted war took its toll on the radical labor organization, dividing workers by playing into the fears and hysteria of the era.
The most important issues of the day. The most important issues of the day. This is is The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the prosecution has wrapped up their case in the Manafort trial. Interesting, going to see how the defense comes out tomorrow swinging. What will their defense be? Everyone's lying, but my guy. And will Manafort take the trial? Take the stand? Will he have the ostrich jacket on? Will he have the satin pants? Who I can guarantee that's not going to happen. Doubt he takes the stand. Anyway, we're here to share some thoughts on what's going on with the trial and everything else around the nation. Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you, Rick.
So does he take the stand?
No.
Never?
No.
Not at all? Not going to happen?
No. I highly doubt it.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
No, I don't think.
But at this point, what's he got to lose? I mean, everything that we hear coming out of there, I don't think the defense really did a good job of discrediting anyone, do you?
No, I mean, I think that the jurors with Gates, I think Gates has been discredited a bit now. The other witnesses aren't. What was the accountant and then a couple other witnesses? There was 5. If they really focused on Gates, because look, Gates stole some stuff and he was in the Trump campaign. So if anybody could be discredited a bit, but I don't think he was completely eliminated, don't get me wrong. But the other witnesses couldn't be discredited. One of the more amusing things is when somebody asked Gates, well, did they threaten you with 200 years? And he said, oh, no, it was 100.
Yeah, that was my favorite.
First 90 are the toughest, Rick.
Yeah, just getting past those first 90.
The last 10, that's a breeze, right?
Yeah, but look, they had 28 witnesses, and all we talk about are the ones, the accountants.
Sure. They got the money. They knew where the money went.
And that's the thing. Someone knows where the bodies are buried, and those folks, they sure turned quickly. I think he's going to be found guilty. He should spend probably a good portion of the rest of his life behind bars, and then he gets to do it again in not too distant future. Which, hey, fun for him.
Mm-hmm.
Probably couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
I don't think he's going to make it right to the trial. I think he gets found guilty.
Yeah. So, do you think at the end of the second guilty, if that comes around, do you think eventually he flips and goes, hey, I'd like to see the light of day at some point?
No, because they can't give him light of day, and I think his only option is to get a pardon.
Oh, okay. So we're gonna go that route. So do you think the whole comparison with Alphonse Capone and Manafort, do you think that was code for something? Well,
they're making a point that some people are accepting this, and here's what it is. If this trial ends and there was nothing that was a big bombshell that there was collusion with the Russians, and if it didn't come out in this trial, then they'll be able to spin the fact of the Capone thing. Not the Capone thing, but spin the fact that look, they nailed him on something that had nothing to do with Russian collusion.
Right.
So therefore, the president's clear. I mean, that's what they'll be out there.
Right, but isn't that what the second trial is supposed to bring? I mean, this one was really just about, hey, we caught you laundering a whole ton of money. This is what this is about.
Yeah, and but then again, if they do try to cut a deal, then anything he says can be discredited. And the reason I say that's important, this is never going to be decided with an indictment of the president. Mueller will not indict the president. The president will not sit down with Mueller. And it's going to come to chicken in the middle of the road, and so it's all going to be in the court of public opinion, most likely.
Yeah, and the more we're divided we are, the more that just I don't know that anyone listens to any of the reason or fact. I think at this point most people are in their camps.
Right, I think so.
And that's kind of scary to me. I mean, you look at this weekend, you had these Unite the Right idiots out, marching around, with their neo-Nazi flags and all that nonsense. And you go, how much crazier can it get? I pine for the boring days. Give me some boring days back. I'd like to have a day without having to worry about if there's a Nazi in the streets.
There again, there was the corporate media, as I'll call it, The corporate media invested all this money. They thought there'd be a repeat of Charlottesville, So they gave massive attention. The counter-protesters showed there was a good thing there, but gave massive attention to 24 people because they invested all their crews and time there, Yeah,
and
just in case something happened.
Did you see the CNN woman out there begging someone from the Unite the Right people to talk to her, and they're just standing there hiding behind their flags with their face hidden? No, we don't want to talk to you. And she's like, "Come on, talk to me, please." It was really quite hysterical.
Oh yeah, and they got the clock ticking on the money, so that's about what they did.
But you're right. It's you have 24 people that got all that airtime.
Mm-hmm.
I keep coming back to that scene in the Blues Brothers. You saw the Blues Brothers, right?
Oh yes.
Where he goes, "I hate Illinois Nazis," and he drives them off the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually okay with that. I shouldn't be, but I am. Let's move on. Evidently, an FBI agent was fired today. Mr. Text Fingers. I guess he was recommended only to be demoted, and suspended for a bit, but they actually fired him, right?
Right. And people, of course, are saying he had the right to the opinion, but they were going to fire him because he talked related to Trump. In a normal case, this never would have all been brought out. No, never would have.
Right.
The high-profile nature of this, threw it all out there. Because today a friend of mine said, well, what happens if down the road Trump leaves and then a Democratic president comes in and they find out that during the Trump campaign an FBI agent did something similar? And I said, it won't come out. This came out because of a high-profile case. Is the only reason this was even looked at.
So you're saying this stuff has always happened. It was just dealt with internally, absolutely. And it was dealt with swiftly and quietly and didn't make the front page of the newspaper.
Sure.
Of course. I mean, it's just basic human nature.
It's all internal.
Yeah, I mean, we're living in very different times now, though.
Right. Oh, exactly. Exactly.
It's crazy. Anyway, so I can never say his name. Stroke, I guess. Strock
or
something like that.
Right.
But he's out of a job now, so there's right. that. Let's move on. I guess North and South Korea are going to sit down with a meeting with an intermediary sometime in September. That going to happen?
Yes, and I don't think this is a bad thing. There again, the national media has tried to say, well, this is going so slow, and he's building missiles. The point is, the countries have not had communication of any sorts really for 70-some years, just sporadically, including with us, North Korea. And so now it's beginning. It's not like Iran, where we have now cut off communication with Iran. Obviously, the steps we took to undo the nuclear deal. This is a deal in a process. So I think it's got to be given time, and at least they're sitting down. This is the third time the two presidents have met from North and South Korea, and at least they're talking. And if there's some differences, they can work them out versus what we are now doing with Iran.
Yeah, there's part of me that goes, the Chinese are manipulating this whole thing. And they're the ones going, you go sit this down and say, look, we need access to your cheap labor. We need lots of local cheap labor. And so we can get our production done and keep down the rising wages and all this stuff. Thinking clearly, just on the labor front. That's my view anyway.
Oh, the Chinese they're very smart. I mean, they're manipulative. They go from multiple sources. When they wanted to go into Tibet, they moved 3 million Chinese in Tibet. They banned the learning of the Tibetan language. They just committed cultural genocide over there, and they got labor out of it.
No, I mean, that's to me, it's just that simple. And I know nothing is ever really simple. I think it's pretty much. I think to me, the writing's on the wall for that. Let's move along. Big elections coming up here in 84 days. Not too long from today. You say that the Democrats are running not just on the repeal of the ACA, what the Republicans wanted to do, but actually have some other ideas. What do you mean?
Well, ironically, what started out as an anchor around the Democratic necks, which was, the ACA, also known as Obamacare, which the Republicans went after that, as we know, tooth and nail. And then the Republicans said, you give us control of the government, we will repeal it. We will repeal it. Well, they didn't repeal it, but they actually have done through executive orders with the president some changes, which has obviously weakened it, and a lot of people will be leaving the exchange for cheaper programs, but if you have pre-existing conditions, you're not going to get those cheaper programs. So those plans. Now, the Democratic side has now, rightfully so, raised this issue that, hey, you know, you guys said you're going to repeal it. So the base is a little bit weak with their candidates, Republican base, because they're saying you didn't do it. You had your chance, you didn't do it, now it's here. But the Democratic side is making this a boutique issue, which is really smart, by the way. They're going in, for example, let's take the Attorney General in West Virginia. They're going after him because he filed a lawsuit on the ACA. So did the Attorney General in Missouri. Both of them are running for the Senate. So they're going after them and saying, hey, you filed the lawsuit. Rick Scott, the governor of Florida, he didn't buy into the Medicaid expansion. Well, Republican Governor Kasich did. It's working in Ohio, right? So they're going after not just the Republicans have done nothing, they're going after Rick Scott. You did this. So they're picking out candidates and how they're tied. One candidate for the Senate was an insurance commissioner, and he approved a rate hike in the premiums. So they really latched on. Now, don't get me wrong, there's other issues they better get on fire, you know, with very quick, but they've come to realize that there were other issues beyond 2 or 3 that they were out there promoting. And this is one, they're getting some traction on it. I don't know if it's too late, but they have certainly been able to get this out front, and we'll see what they do with it from now to November.
And the Republicans ran not just on repeal, but on repeal and replace. You know, supposedly they had the utopian plan, and they couldn't even repeal it, and they've had no suggestions on what to replace it with. And I think you're right at the very beginning. I think everyone, especially some of my Republican friends, were literally shocked that there was nothing there. That it wasn't even the same bad ideas that they'd had in the past, like health savings accounts and more stuff like that. They didn't even have that ready to go.
Well, look, they did nothing. They did not balance the nation's budget.
Oh, far from it. They went the other direction.
Right. They went the other direction. Right, exactly. And they provided, and the tax relief they provided is not going to get them votes. They're starting to realize that. They didn't repeal and replace. They didn't stop, as they said, the illegals like they said they would do, because they control both chambers. Now, Mitch McConnell makes the argument that Harry Reid, the Democratic leader, used to make. Well, just give me some more votes. People don't. The Senate is controlled by the Republicans. Don't tell me, give me some more votes. Yep. You control the chamber. That's the way they looked when Harry Reid tried to say that, and they have failed on all these things. So, what does that translate to? The base may not be so excited to run to the polls for them.
Well, let's hope so. I'm hoping they stay home.
If the Democratic side is smart.
I'm hoping they stay home. I'm hoping the Republicans stay home because, look, there's got to be some pendulum swing back somewhere towards sanity. Because to me, this, healthcare is the most important issue. Ask any family. They want to make sure that if their kids, go ride their bike down the street and they break both legs, that they're going to get the care that they need. They're not going to have to worry about being bankrupt. That's just simple common sense. And I think everybody wants a solution to this. Prices are getting out of hand. You hear these horrible stories all the time of families struggling. And, the Republicans have done nothing from the time they took power other than as you point out, make things worse. And the people who are getting these micro plans, because, hey, we're making those mini plans great again. Once they get sick and realize it doesn't cover anything anymore, they're going to be bankrupt, and we're going to be right back where we started from.
Well, I mean, not that I count, because no one has any sympathy for me, and I don't ask them to. But right now, I have a prescription pending, and one tube is $350. And I don't have health care. I have zero health care. And because the premiums escalated to the point I had to dump it and take my shot. So, it's just me. Yes, my kids are adults and things, so I'm not asking for sympathy, but there are people all out there, like me and other people, and people with families would have it far worse than I do. But it's out there. I mean, it's spread across the society. It doesn't say, oh, you're a Republican, I'll make sure you have health care. The Democrat doesn't. The Republicans have to realize there's tons of Republicans out there in the same boat.
Yeah. And the sad reality is that, unfortunately, you're in that situation. and nobody should be. I mean, we're the wealthiest country in the history of civilization at its wealthiest point. The least we can do is make sure that if you have something that ails you, you get to see a doctor. I mean, if you get in trouble, you get to see a lawyer. I mean, it just seems that simple to me.
Yes, I agree.
It's just crazy. Let's move on. Opioid addiction. I've been saying for a while when it was just inner city minorities shooting heroin, because like when I was a kid, we found a guy. I think I was like 8 or 9 years old. We found a guy dead on the side of the neighbor's house with a needle in his arm. I believed it was heroin, so I was told. Nobody cared about him. In the big, heavy army green coat, nobody cared about him. But now this addiction has hit, lily white suburbs, and we've got Oxy, and now it's a crisis. Now we've got a crisis when just poor people were dying in poor neighborhoods in the ghetto. Nobody cared, but now crisis, right?
Well, yeah. Well, the article came out today, and it's interesting. Not that there's a correlation with the Republican to the opioid, but there is an interesting fact, that is that more of the districts that are headed by Republicans have some of the highest opioid abuse rates and opioid problems in America. It's all over the country, but rural, South, and also Appalachia it's out of control problems, and there's a lot of Republicans there. So yes, it's not just an inner city problem; it's all over the place, and so people have to realize in the positions of power they've got to try to do something with this catastrophic situation. So it's not just the inner city problem.
So is it pain and suffering? Is it a lack of opportunity? Have they identified your average opioid addict? I mean, most of the people who I've known throughout the years who have had these addictions, it started off, again, most of the people that I know personally, so it's a personal story. Most of the people I've known, they got hurt at work. And they got hooked on, Vicodin and Percocet, and then eventually got to Oxy. And then they had to go, look for street stuff because the prescriptions were cut off. Do we know what drives people to this? Do we know what it is that hooks them?
It's a wide variety. It's not just a poverty index. You've actually raised a good point of what's happened. And, for the last 10 years, I've sponsored people in addiction recovery, and I still do it today on an almost daily basis as a volunteer. And with the cases I know with the opioid addiction, there were accidents, injuries, overprescriptions. People got hooked on them. Then they went, when they couldn't get them anymore, and they went into a higher street price for them. And then a lot of the people went to a cheaper product, which was heroin. But of course, it is death and is massive addiction, instant, almost. So that's sort of the history of it. Yes, it's been used, the painkillers and problems of that nature, injuries at work. So it's not just the poverty deal in an inner city. It's all over the place for a wide variety of reasons.
It's something's got to be done, and I gotta tell people I've throughout all the years I've had a couple of surgeries, and I had some work injuries throughout the years, and doctors were going, here, if you feel uncomfortable, take this Vicodin or this Percocet or this they give you the super ibuprofen, like 800 milligrams. It's just like taking a couple extra. But I never took any of this stuff because I'm always fearful of once you take it once, that just changes everything. And I'm just kind of crazy about it. But I feel sorry for people. I really do struggle with this.
I have a friend in recovery. He went to the doctor today, and the doctor did not ask him anything, was prescribing a narcotic, and he said, wait a minute, I'm in recovery. I have to have an alternative. They were just going to give it to him.
Yeah.
I mean, these days, you've got to at least inquire.
Yeah. Is there any before I let you go? Is there any alternative to the addictive painkillers? I mean, I have some friends who say, "Well, we should legalize pot because pot is a, can I guess alleviate some pain." And I don't know. I've never smoked it, so I don't know. Is there a non-addictive pain medicine? Is there a treatment? Because look, I think we're a society today that we don't want to feel anything. So is there anything non-addictive?
There's different levels of what they could prescribe. And here's the problem. Like OxyContin, they were prescribing at such high levels. It wasn't a controlled situation. They were high levels of pills. And then people would take two because two was better than one, and that's a problem.
That is a problem.
Sure.
when you don't bother to follow the basic rules on the bottle. Because, hey, we can't read either, so there's that. Bob, I appreciate the time. Great stuff, man.
Thank you, Rick. Okay. Thank you.
As always, our good friend Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. On the phone.
Radio of working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1935. That was the day that 35 journalists of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer walked off the job. They represented about half of the newspaper's newsroom staff at the time. The strike started because the paper had fired 2 longtime employees, drama critic Everhart Armstrong and head photographer Frank Slim Lynch. The 2 had joined the American Newspaper Guild, a union for newspaper employees that had begun in 1933. Management claimed the firings were due to the 2 employees' poor job performance and insubordination. But Armstrong had worked for the paper for 17 years, and Lynch for 15 years before joining the union. The Seattle paper was owned by the newspaper giant William Randolph Hearst. Hearst was known for his anti-union, anti-communist, anti-Roosevelt stances. The strike was thus a battle between a few dozen journalists and this national opinion maker. Even though the numbers of workers on strike were small, the cause won the support of other labor unions. The Teamsters refused to deliver newsprint to the Post-Intelligencer. Longshoremen, metal workers, and lumber workers joined the newspapermen on the picket line. The strike wore on for 3.5 months, and the paper was shut down. Many in the public supported the newspapermen. The strikers put out their own newspaper. They called it the Guild Daily. It included updates on the strike, as well as general news and sports coverage. The circulation of the strike paper reached 60,000 a day. Finally, President Franklin Roosevelt won a landslide re-election victory. Perhaps recognizing the mood of the nation was swinging toward the working man, management decided to settle the strike. Today, the Newspaper Guild has 34,000 members throughout the United States and Canada. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
We want the world and we want it now. We're going to take it anyhow. We want the airwaves.
It's an interesting scenario Bob Ney talks about because, I've known a couple of people over the years who have been addicted to painkillers because of, injuries at work. And I think of one guy in particular who fell off slipped off the gas tank of the truck, got his foot caught in between. Just one of the most horrible things I'd heard. He got his foot caught in between the frame and the gas tank, and as he fell backward, his foot stayed in there, and his whole foot wrapped around the tank, and he ended up landing on the back of his neck and cracking a couple of vertebrae, and he was just totally messed up. And his foot was never going to be right ever again. Tore the Achilles tendon, broke a bunch of stuff. And just ripped everything to shreds in there. And they had him drugged, pretty heavily for a while. And the last time I saw him, he was in a bad way. I mean, really just in a bad way. Because they had begun to cut him off of the drugs, and he was, from what I understand, looking in other places, and it was just a terrible thing. And I don't know what the answer to it is, but I know that I've gone into places, and the first thing they do is they want to give you a bunch of painkillers and all of that. And I there's got to be a better way. I'm just not sure what that is, but there's got to be something. Especially as Bob points out, the amounts that they used to give, just outrageous, and just kind of crazy. And now my fear is it goes to the opposite extreme, to where he may need it, and there's no way in a cold day you're going to get it, which forces people into the other stuff. So we're in really very difficult policy terms. But I'll tell you one thing: the companies that make the drugs, they are doing just very well. Thank you very much. Love to hear your thoughts, any stories, thoughts, comments. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of the first hour of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. As always, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back with our good friend Propane Jane. Stick around.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
America's political history has been written in the fierce narrative of war. Not our country's many military clashes with foreign nations, but our own unending war for democracy in the USA. Generation after generation of moneyed elites have persisted in trying to take wealth and power from the workaday majority and concentrate both in their own hands to establish a de facto American aristocracy. Every time, the people have rebelled in organized mass struggles against the monopolists and financial royalists, literally battling for a little more economic fairness, social justice, and equal opportunity. And now the time of rebellion is upon us again, for we the people are suddenly in the grip of a brutish level of monopolistic power. Corporate concentration of markets, profits, workplace decision-making, political influence, and our nation's total wealth is surpassing that of the infamous era of robber barons. Apple, which just recently became the first U.S. corporation to reach a stock value of $1 trillion, is now larger than Bank of America, Boeing, Disney, Ford, Volkswagen, and 20 other brand-name giants combined. And the powerful tech industry is now controlled by just 5 superpowers, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Netflix, which raked in half of this year's stock price gains by the 500 largest corporations. Indeed, the recent gold rush of corporate mergers has created mega firms, shriveling competition in most industries: airlines, banks, drug companies, food, hospitals, hotels, law firms, media, oil, etc. Fewer and bigger corporations mean that those few attain overwhelming power over the rest of us. They're able to control workers' pay, jack up prices, dominate elections, and become even fewer, bigger, and more powerful. This is Jim Hightower saying it's an all-out corporate class war on the American people, and they're winning.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
The man who sends the investor class diving through their tax shelters. Rick Smith.
At every trough you stop to feed. With your arrogance, your ignorance and greed. Now here come the cuts and redundancy. Through the absolute indifference, the avarice, incompetence, your arrogance, your ignorance, your greed.
Oh yeah, the greed. The $400 million the Koch and their ilk are going to spend on this election cycle. $20 million they spent on promoting that horrible tax scheme. The bus tour that's coming. Cannot wait. And they're going to prop up some horrible candidates. I look at this guy in Illinois back in 2017, the guy who won the Republican primary for State House. This guy, Steve West, evidently told a radio show that Hitler was right. He's now, 15th district there in Missouri. You got Devin Nunes in a secret recording said, remember, you got Devin Nunes, the Kremlin gremlin, who's the head of the House Intel Committee. Telling donors that it's his job to protect Trump at all costs. I mean, just to show you how crazy some of these Republicans are, there's a woman in Florida who evidently claimed to have a degree from the University of Miami in Ohio. Turns out every bit of the diploma was wrong because it was fake. You got Bob Goodlatte, the Republican from Virginia, whose own son maxed out a contribution to the opponent, to the Democrat, to get him out. And of course, Chris Collins, the Republican from New York, has decided, and probably rightly so, to not seek re-election while being arrested for insider trading. Interestingly enough, the guy that wants to replace him was somebody who said that Michelle Obama should return to being a man. And should be let loose somewhere in the outback of Zimbabwe. Yeah, so you're going to go from a thief and a criminal to, an anti-Semite and a hate monger. Very, very cute. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the weekend's events. Also, well, the state of the GOP and Trumplandia, our good friend, Propane Jane. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So, lots of fun this weekend. Unite the right.
That didn't turn out very well for them.
No, it really didn't. It was one of those things where if none of the counter-protesters would have showed up, you would have not noticed there was anything going on.
I mean, you really can't make any of this up, actually.
I wouldn't, but see, I wouldn't make this up because it's just bad. There's nothing good that comes out of this. There's nothing good that the mouth-breathing knuckle draggers who barely made it out of third grade, and we handed them a high school diploma and now live in the backwoods and dream of who knows what, that they now feel entitled to be on my TV screen anytime they have a whim.
Yeah, they do. And, I mean, they're taking cues from their president. I mean, this is what Trump does. And he is notorious for holding these rallies strategically, to get himself out of a bad news cycle. And, I think that his only hope at this point for invigorating like the same level of enthusiasm that he had in 2016 is to really throw out the red meat and to get these really fringe extremists, bigots, and white supremacists of all stripes to come out and to make a big show of their support for what's going on. But I think what's so interesting is that in some ways they're not getting the same turnout. People have sort of reverted back to that kind of secret hidden place they were in right before the election. They didn't have any signs out. They weren't rolling around with Trump bumper stickers. And then right after the election, they were really proud to say they voted for him. And now all of a sudden, I think when it comes to these really extreme elements, it's getting harder and harder to get them out because of the consequences.
Yeah, and even the crazy ones. I mean, they don't want to be outed anymore. They're back in the closet. Where they belong. Look, you might not be able to get rid of them, but at least put them back in a box.
Exactly. I mean, and this is genuine economic anxiety, right? I mean, they're afraid of losing their jobs, and they're afraid of being ostracized in the community, and that's just that's not just kind of the low level base supporter. That's also members of the administration. Jeff Sessions was just here in Houston. Eating at a Mexican restaurant, which actually used to be one of my favorites, but now I'm sort of questioning their decision-making process. But, they go out to these restaurants and they want to be amongst the people, but then what's happening in reality is that there's a backlash and they're being confronted. And so I think they're all walking on eggshells.
Yeah, we had a woman on last week who confronted Scott Pruitt in D.C. and her story was quite amusing and interesting. And look, I'm all in favor of that.
Was she the one that got him at the restaurant right before he resigned?
Yeah.
Oh, cheers to her.
Yeah, Kristen Mint.
I'll have to catch that.
Yeah, she was fantastic. And look, this is the environment that they've created, and they deserve what's coming. What I did find interesting over the weekend, though, is because I was watching little bits and pieces of the coverage, because I did want to. I really viscerally wanted to ignore it. And there's a big part of me that goes, if every one of us just kind of just let them, it's kind of like the bear in the woods thing, or the tree in the woods, or however that goes. If nobody pays them any attention and they just kind of have their little circle, whatever, and do whatever they do, and everyone ignores them, then I think all of us would be much happier.
Yeah, and I think that we're fortunate in that there wasn't a really violent clash or some tragedy that took place that drew more attention to that event. But I think this is also a situation where the Republican Party really can't afford to have this type of stuff floating around this close to an election. Optically, they're still always trying to toe this line
that we're not racist. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, they're still trying to pretend.
Exactly, and you have Trump, who really doesn't care. I mean, he wants to fire those people up regardless. But I think there are those establishment Republicans that have sense enough to know that in some of these purple districts, that's just not going to go over well. And so I think that they don't necessarily want it to be a story either. And, you know, as far as like, you know, Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan go, they just kind of want to duck their head down. They want to get these, you know, Supreme Court hearings underway. They don't want to be distracted by any of this red meat, even though they actually need it to get their voters to the polls.
Yeah, they need the cover. They need to keep people all frothed up in the panties and get them to the polls. You're absolutely
exactly
right. But you know, as I was watching some of the coverage, I felt sorry for the woman from CNN. Because, you know, they sent her out there to, you know, hunt down these 24, 23, or however many there were actually, to get them to comment. And none of them, I think, were articulate enough to actually string a sentence together to.
Oh, I'm shocked.
To say why they were there. You know, maybe just someone drove them there and dropped them off. But I found it hysterical. The two of them were standing and they had the American flag over their faces, where you could just see their eyes a little bit. And, you know, I'm going, these are probably the people who scream about, you know, the women wearing the whatever the
burqas.
Yeah. And the Antifa people covering their faces. I thought these are probably those same people, because it was just back in July you had the Republicans who proposed the Unmasking Antifa Act of 2018. And I go, you know, should we be unmasking them?
I mean, but here's the thing. What is the ultimate goal? I mean, you know, I think the Republicans are going to continue to, you know, vilify the people who are anti-Nazi and anti-white supremacists. But at the end of the day, you know, where does that go? I mean, they still look like people who are defending racism and are defending just this rank ignorance that is being espoused by these people. And so I think whatever tactics they're wanting to use, they're really running out of room on the jetway. You know, they don't really have, they can't really take that any further, I don't think.
Yeah, well, it's not like their runway's all that long to begin with.
It's really not. But, you know, I mean, I'm constantly tweeting about the Southern strategy. And, you know, this is something that has been going on for over 50 years.
Sure.
And it's worked, and it's worked for many reasons. But I think Trump in so many ways is like the culmination of those 50 years. And now it's out in the open, and, you know, there really isn't any turning back from that. I think that they're going to have to pick what side are we on. And unfortunately, they're looking like the side of white supremacy. And that's going to bode terribly for them, I think, at the polls.
Well, we'll see what comes on November 6th. And again, I keep saying I hope people will be marching their way to there. But, you know, the weekend was so bad that today Trump had to come out on Twitter and attack wacky Omarosa.
The fact that he calls anyone wacky, I think, is just interesting, right? I mean, he's got no insight.
Well, you know...
He's always projecting. And how wacky was she when, you know, she worked for him for all these, 15 years?
Yeah, he only hires the best people.
Yeah, well, and, you know, as we were talking about last week, we were talking about the third oldest profession and, you know, people of color that sort of sell themselves out. And I think, you know, this is just a really interesting situation. I mean, I think both of them are, you know, buffoons, but you know, beyond that aspect of it, you know, I think for Omarosa, she's someone who, you know, really put herself out there as like, you know, a representation of black womanhood that is supportive of Trump. And that's something that people, you know, at Fox News and various members of the Republican Party really latch onto and wave that flag, like, okay, see, we have this black woman, and, you know, she's popular, quote unquote, and she's supportive of Trump. But then ultimately, you know, the mask is lifted, right? Because now that there's been a rift between the two of them and they're at each other's throats, well, then the truth starts to come out, right? And then she starts being honest about, okay, well, there was racism. And of course she overlooked it then because, you know, the money was good or whatever arrangement they had. But, you know, now all of a sudden we get to the facts of the matter. And, you know, I don't necessarily think that she's wrong about some of the things she's saying. I think it just implicates her further as being somebody who sold out.
Yeah. So are we, because you said you're not sure to the extent of their, are we expecting a payoff for her to come up here in the next couple of months? Is this one of the Avenatti's 3 women that, you know, that he's got, you know, on the line who may come out here in the near future?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if she's his type. I would suspect that she's not. You know, from what he says, you know, he likes somebody that, unfortunately to say, looks like Ivanka. That's his
creepy.
Words, not mine.
Thanks for that. That's fairly creepy.
That's his words, not mine.
So did you find it odd that the reports came out that they fired her in the Situation Room?
No, because I don't think that they treat the Situation Room. I saw an article that was like, you know, what is the Situation Room and why was Omarosa in there, and, you know, what are presidents typically supposed to do while they're in there? I mean, you know, we're all familiar with Obama in the Situation Room the night that Osama bin Laden was taken out. So we know what the importance of that room.
Right. And look, you know, when we had done our labor history tour back in 2013, we went to the George W. Bush Presidential Library, and evidently he stole the Situation Room that he inherited before they built a new one. So, you know, the guy who was the curator of you know, the Presidential Library, you know, took us in there to do to interview some people. So we got to sit in what was the Situation Room. And as he pointed out, you know, at the time, you know, this is the most secure room in the entire country. This is the place where nothing can get hacked into. You know, there's no outside any communication. Everything's, you know, hyper secure and hyper, sanitized or, and I go, you're going to take her into that room, the most secure room in the entire country, to fire her?
Even putting Trump in there. I mean, he's
president. I mean, you can make the argument that, look, we hate it, but he does hold the title of Commander in Chief. And maybe if you bring in some crayons and paper in there or some toys or something, you can keep him occupied. But I just said, you know, why would you take her into that room? What is it that you're trying? What is it you're trying to hide? You know, what is it that because what do you want her to screw? I don't know, but it just seemed really bizarre to me. Given my experience, that they would take her into that room.
Well, again, the sanctity of that room was gone on January 20th, 2017, because, yes, he was inaugurated, et cetera, but this man is under investigation and was under investigation at that time for possible collusion with Russia. So as far as we know, he's a Russian plant. We still haven't gotten confirmation that he's not.
I'm with you on that. But, you know, here's the thing.
So even him going in there from day one is like, okay, that's questionable. But even beyond that, this is the reality TV show Apprentice Room. This is White House Celebrity Apprentice Room. This is not the Situation Room. And so the what we expect as far as the decorum and the level of security and all of these things that have been the norm up until him getting there, we have to just accept that they are not abiding by any of that. They just simply are not. Everything they've demonstrated to this point is that they follow no rules, they follow no precedent, they follow no tradition. And so, of course, she was in there, and of course, she possibly had whatever, you know, device she was using to record all sorts of things. Because who's the gatekeeper of any of these, you know, norms in that White House?
Right. But, you know, you would think, or at least I would think, look, I understand, you know, Trump has no, no idea what, you know, how important these things are, or procedure or precedent or any, I get that. But John Kelly, I mean, come on.
Well, when did he get there, right? I mean, I don't know when she made these recordings. I don't know if it was, I don't know the exact date. But what was going on prior to him being there?
No, but he fired her in the Situation Room.
Oh, okay. You're talking about like her actually being there and him firing her. That's the story? Yeah,
well, to me, that's, why is she there? I mean, why is she in the Situation Room at all? Ever? But even for that.
Why are Jared and Ivanka there? Why was Scaramucci anywhere? I mean, why are any of these people anywhere near any of this?
Yeah, good point.
Why is Kellyanne Conway there? I mean, just I don't think that the people that we're talking about are capable of making those deductions. I really honestly think that if that person has been an accessory to the president in any way, shape, or form, that person is allowed to be around him either because that person is like a soothing, they're the pacifier for the moment, or, he just wants them to be there, and they do anything they need to do to placate this man.
Yeah. But what do you say to because originally, I guess the report has come out that Trump didn't know that she was being fired.
Yeah, that's what they said initially. And I think that, the claim that she's making is that, she has all of these communications between herself and also Jared and Ivanka now, as it's recently coming out, that they were somehow, really regretful and remorseful that, that she had been fired in this way, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't think that was going to happen. They were shocked. And so who knows? And I would imagine that, when John Kelly came in there, then, took it upon himself to clean up the house or, get everybody in line, which he's failed at completely, utterly.
Horribly. No, you're right. It's
horribly.
I had a little bit of hope. Him and, Mad Dog Mattis might, whip Trump into shape. Not so much. Mad Dog, sad cat.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe he goes in there and, Omarosa is the low-hanging fruit. She's she's a black woman. She's got, maybe some contrary opinion most of the time. She's, from what I've seen of her on television, she doesn't have just the, brightest disposition. And so maybe that was somebody who was easy to get rid of to try to separate Trump from that reality TV show celebrity lifestyle and get him more into the mindset of this is a White House and, this is your administration and these people are supposed to have some qualifications to be in these places. But again, I think it all falls apart because ultimately Trump is a piece of the puzzle that doesn't fit where they're trying to put him either.
No, you're right. And you read some of the stories that come out, like the fact that he doesn't take presidential daily briefings, and even the ones that they try and dumb down, he still can't read.
It's so embarrassing.
It really is. And you look at the rest of the world going, like I guess Iran just came out and said that, we're not going to deal with the U.S. anymore because we can't trust you.
Well, you can't. And at the end of the day, I mean, when they are meeting with him, I think it is painfully clear that he doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, I can't remember what country it was from, but the guy just recently had to basically give him flashcards in terms of explaining world trade. And so this is someone who knows absolutely nothing about the job he is tasked with doing. They say the American president is supposed to be like the CEO. He's supposed to be the chief executive. And I think people had this, fantasy and mythology of Trump that he really knows everything and is in control of everything, in his Trump enterprise, and that somehow, he could extrapolate that to the White House. And what's actually being revealed as time goes on is that he doesn't know what he's doing. And he just has all of these minions that run around and kind of do his bidding for him and try to piece together where they can. But it's completely dysfunctional. And I think this is why he, declared bankruptcy 6 times. I think this is why, we still haven't seen his tax returns. And I think this is why, we're running this gigantic deficit. And those things are not a coincidence. He just doesn't know what he's doing, unfortunately.
Well, let me ask you this, because, you look at this and I've heard that frame before, that the president's like the CEO, which I completely disagree with.
Yeah.
Because, the CEO in a corporate structure is the final word. He's the guy. We have, balancing powers. I don't want dictator type people in that office. I want people who know how to use all of the resources around them. And look, I don't expect the president to know everything, but I do expect them to be able to access the resources that we have, because the U.S. president has unlimited resources and the ability to get unlimited information. So there is never anything he should not know with a little bit of curiosity.
Right.
Problem is we've had too many Republican presidents who just don't seem to be all that curious.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Trump's curiosity doesn't extend much further than his own self and how people perceive him, and what his approval rating is, and whether or not he feels like he has a chummy relationship with someone.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an area where I've always said as a psychiatrist that his personality traits and what seems to be a clinical personality disorder, or more than one, they are such that it actually inhibits his ability, it impairs his functioning, to where he can't really focus on other things because he's so worried about himself and soothing his own ego that he really can't run a business and he really can't run the country. And I think that's just really made self-evident every single day.
Yeah, it's nuts. You know what I'm waiting for? On the other side of this, just a complete change.
Mm-hmm.
Where are all the religious people saying that God is smiting us now because of our policy? Because I don't know about where you live, but it is raining like it's never rained in here where I live in Pennsylvania. And
is it?
And in New York, evidently where Bedminster is, he couldn't golf over the weekend because it was raining so much. And the flash flooding, and where are the crazy people, the religious people saying, God is angry with Trump and the policies and all that?
I don't know what they're blaming it on right now, because an easy out would be just to say that it's climate change, but they can't do that.
Because then you'd have to admit, well, maybe we did it.
I mean, they use what's convenient whenever it's convenient.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that they're going to keep their mouth shut if it's in contradiction of what they believe.
And finally, speaking of contradiction of beliefs, did you see this article written by Stephen Miller's uncle?
Oh, yes, and I loved it. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I'm going, hypocrite much?
I mean, when your own family's calling you out. But even still, I mean, this chain migration, I mean, Melania's parents just got citizenship. I mean, obviously they're not talking about it.
It's because she got the Einstein Award.
Be best. Be a hypocrite. I mean, they're not even trying to hide it. I think that's the most disgusting part. I mean, they're just doing all of these things. It's do as I say and definitely not as I do.
Yeah, I just thought it was quite comical. I mean, and interesting, and maybe well, never mind. I keep. Maybe it's something about me. Maybe you can analyze me a bit. I still have hope that some of these people who would show up and to these idiotic rallies and unite the right, that there's still some hope for them, that maybe some redeemable quality, some bit of humanity to where they go, you know what, I screwed up.
I mean, I think that there are some people who are just incapable of doing that. I mean, I think that they're unable to admit that they were wrong. They're unable to admit that they made a mistake. And I think, in particular, when we're talking about white supremacy and all of this bigotry, so much of what people are choosing to believe, they're believing that because they want a validation and the affirmation of their self-image. And they want to believe that, they are superior and that they're better than other people. And so actually accepting that that's not the case and admitting that out loud actually just tears their whole world down, because that's everything that it was predicated on for their entire lives, is that belief in their own superiority. And so I think that's why it's increasingly hard to get people like that to come down off of that, unless they actually face some really life-changing circumstances or consequences of holding that belief system. And I think we do see some examples of that where, people are shouting slurs in public, and next thing you know, it ends up on social media and they lose their job. I mean, that's sort of a micro example of how that happens. But more broadly, until our institutions have that same kind of, accountability, I think that, a lot of this is going to continue because, people just believe what they believe and they're not being confronted on it.
interesting times ahead and fun times. And right here you will be to help us work through it.
Awesome. I absolutely will.
I appreciate the time, Jane. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Have a great week.
As always, good stuff. Our good friend Propane Jane. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
The EPA this summer proposed a rule that may allow a number of new products to contain asbestos.
Trump's EPA is bringing asbestos back. California pushes back against Trump's rollback of mileage and emissions standards as California shatters the record for hottest month ever recorded and hottest rainfall. Plus,
still have time to act.
Bad news and good news in a scary new global warming study.
All of those scary stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
So in other words, you're saying that they might come out making asbestos look not as dangerous as it really is in their evaluation. Exactly.
Hey, MAGA, making asbestos great again. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, the summer of heat records continues to continue.
Indeed, it does. More shocking records shattered in this record-breaking global warming turbocharged summer of 2018. The hottest rainfall ever recorded on the planet, 119 degrees, fell on Imperial, California last week.
The hottest rainfall?
Yes, it is extremely rare to have rainfall above 100 degrees.
I mean, this is the water? The water itself is above 100 degrees?
Yes, 119 degrees.
Wow.
And Death Valley in California broke the record for the all-time hottest month in recorded history. That was in July, breaking the record that Death Valley set just last year. Meanwhile, retail gas prices are going up. The price of crude oil spiked this week in anticipation of the Trump administration reimposing sanctions on Iran, including its oil exports, in coming months. But Politico reports that pain at the pump for consumers likely won't be as bad as the last time gas prices were this high because, thanks to President Obama, fuel efficiency standards are a lot higher today. So families don't have to fill their gas tanks quite as often. Speaking of fuel efficiency standards, as expected, the Trump administration last week proposed weakening future vehicle mileage standards that would have saved consumers even more in fuel costs starting in 2022. Analysts say big oil will be the big beneficiary from increasing oil consumption. Even the EPA's own data estimates that 40,000 more Americans will die every year from the increase in air pollution. But important to note, these Trump rollbacks are not a done deal. You can weigh in during the short window for public comment. Speak up at regulations.gov. The Trump EPA is also proposing revoking California's authority to set its own higher standards, credited with reducing the state's notorious air pollution. This week, California pushed back in what promises to be a protracted legal battle. The state regulator, the California Air Resources Board, issued a scathing and detailed report refuting the administration's rollback as, quote, contrary to the facts and the law.
That's not a bug. That's a feature.
Well, California says it plans to hold automakers to those tighter standards to maintain public health benefits.
Good. States' rights. Remember when Republicans used to believe in that sort of thing?
The Trump EPA is also bringing asbestos back.
Yay!
Proposing a new rule to allow companies to use it in some products with agency approval. Asbestos is banned in most countries because it causes mesothelioma and lung cancers. But it's not banned in the U.S., despite killing thousands of Americans every year. Now, the EPA says it's just closing a loophole, but critics say no amount of asbestos is safe and only an outright ban on all uses is sufficient.
It only kills about 40,000 people a year and is banned pretty much everywhere else in the world except for here. What are you worried about, Des?
Finally, a message of hope from scientists who are pushing back against media coverage of their new study on global warming's long-term catastrophic consequences. The Hothouse Earth study concludes that if global temperatures rise more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, a domino effect could kick in, triggering self-reinforcing climate change feedbacks that push the climate system into hothouse conditions, rendering large parts of the Earth uninhabitable. However, scientist and co-author Diana Liverman of the University of Arizona tells the Green News Report that the good news is that with action, it's all completely avoidable.
So Hothouse Earth is not our destiny. It's an option that we could choose. Hopefully we're going to choose a much more stable path, and we go kick off all of these feedbacks that take us to a much hotter environment.
Well, I hope we don't, but I'm starting to run out of hope. Is that just me?
Dr. Liverman says she sees hope in political and social movements demanding action all around the world.
For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us, follow us, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Don't give up on us, I know we can still come through.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So what a weekend it was. Oh, the fun, the hilarity, the games, all that stuff in D.C. You had the handful show up for the Unite the Right. Not a lot of uniting going on there. It was kind of sad for them. I on a very, very small level, I kind of felt sad for them because they probably put so much time. And look, there's not a lot of brain power there to begin with, so it probably took a lot of energy that they couldn't spare to throw this together, only to have, well, none of them show up. And I guess that's a good thing. And I, as I've been saying, we should just be ignoring them. We shouldn't be talking to them. But here, I'm going to do it anyway, which is why I've asked Madeline Peltz to come talk with us. She's a researcher at Media Matters for America. She's been following this stuff. Madeline, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So my inclination is to ignore it. Am I wrong?
Well, I think that there's a balance that can happen because I think that every single thing that these people do should be observed and documented such that they can't do this type of thing without being noticed and and allowing people to organize in opposition to what they're doing. But at the same time, I think that the media often overlooks some of the amazing people's movements that are taking place in D.C. and all across the country. Groups like Black Lives Matter and union organizations that are saying no to hatred and racism.
No, this is one of those things where I have a real problem with some media outlets. I remember back in 2011, the Scott Walker passes Act 10, or they're about to do that. There's all of the uprising there. 100,000 people in the streets in Madison. I was sleeping on the Capitol floor for 10 days. And we were talking about, all the stuff that's going on. No real major news coverage.
Right.
The president didn't put on his comfortable shoes and get out and march on the picket lines. There wasn't a lot of attention to 100,000 people in the streets of a state capitol, yet 24 nitwits who cover their face with the flag and salute themselves however they do, they get covered by everybody. And I'm going, there's something screwy here.
Yeah, I was, if you saw coverage from the rally this weekend, there's a tremendous horde of media following around these 15 idiots who are in the streets demonstrating on the wrong side of history, whereas on the other side of the barricade behind the police, there's thousands of people from all across the country who came to D.C. to show them that they're not welcome here and that their views are not, that we are many and they are few.
Yeah, but at the end of it, and look, and I believe in freedom of speech and all of that stuff, but at some point, you just got to go sit down and shut up already.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what these demonstrations, these counter protests seek to communicate.
But here's the scary thing. I mean, and this is what really, is truly scary outside of a lot of the people who were probably there didn't even know really what they were doing. They're just, I'm here because I have my white pride. Because they've been told that they're under attack. And I got to be honest, as a white guy, I don't really feel all that under attack. But there's an entire network and a whole wing of media that's telling these white voters that they're coming for you. It's the end of your heritage. It's the end of you and your family. And it scares the simple and the dim.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's millions of people who watch Fox News primetime every night. I watch Fox News primetime every night, but for another reason, because their coverage of Unite the Right and other similar expressions of white nationalism, the tide of which we've seen rising under the Trump presidency, is extremely sympathetic. And so the kid gloves with which these Unite the Right 2 demonstrators were treated this morning on Fox and Friends, it's nothing new to, the most watched cable news channel.
And that's the scary thing. I mean, they are the most watched channel, and I know people who live and breathe and die by it. You go any business and there it is, blaring right in your face. I mean, they have done a masterful job of building a following that's incredibly loyal and simple.
Yeah, well, they operate on a divide and conquer strategy, which is to distrust the other outlets, any outlet that's not Fox News. They're told to distrust them because they're liars, they're fakers, they're out to get the president. Sean Hannity repeats the same epithet every single night, the destroy Trump propaganda, left-wing fake news media. It just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, but at some point, don't you just kind of step back? Because look, I mean, there are some things that CNN and MSNBC does that I go, come on, that's a bridge too far. The fact that you've covered Stormy Daniels 1,000 times and we don't hear about anything else, I got a problem with that too. But that's a little different than, we're talking about, cross burning, hood wearing Nazi types walking in the streets.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that CNN and MSNBC are, I wouldn't get all of my news from cable news, but what I will say is that the business of Fox News is based on bigotry, and that bigotry is what makes them money, and that's what makes them fundamentally different from the other cable network.
That's a good point. I mean, when I have watched them, it's always about blaming somebody else, and what the right, I think, has done masterfully through their media is their viewers are the most intelligent, most hardworking, the bestest of Everest, or however you're going to frame that. They're just the most fantastic. Their egos are self-bloated, and anything that's wrong and anything that deviates from the perfect existence that they believe they should have is the fault of these others. And you can go down the list. It's the Mexicans or the immigrants coming from other countries or African Americans or whatever. It's always somebody else's fault.
Yeah, it's pretty safe to say that if you're white, Fox News will rush to come to your defense, and they'll tell stories about the factories closing and the jobs going overseas and all of these sort of emotional stories about what they perceive to be white America when the jobs crisis has affected people of all stripes and colors. But if you're talking about immigrants or people fleeing domestic violence or refugees, those people are numbers, they're statistics, they're criminals, and that's just a trope that's repeated night after night after night.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I've seen factories close down, and I've known people who've lost jobs. It wasn't the immigrants who cost them the jobs. It wasn't the Mexicans who did it. It was the white guy who ran the place. Because most businesses, the CEOs are white guys. It was them who made the choices so that the other white guys who owned the shares in the company could make a little bit more money. That's generally who closed the factory down. It wasn't the unionized workers. It wasn't immigrants. It wasn't any of that. It was the white guy at the top going, hey, I want more green.
I 100% agree, and I believe that if you think that immigrants are the ones who are causing these economic problems in our country, you really are missing the greater point, which is exactly what you're saying. People who are sitting at the top making these decisions that just ruin people's lives. And, the number one agenda, the only thing that the Trump agenda has been able to pass is a giant tax cuts for billionaires and corporations.
Yeah, and now we find out that the myth, because we all, some of us, and I wasn't one of them, but some of us believed that if you cut taxes, something would eventually trickle down. I mean, we've been hearing this since Reagan was in office, that if we give enough to the wealthy, something will have to fall out of their pockets. Their pockets are only so big, right? And that, by stimulating the economy, more jobs will be created. And the more jobs that are created, the higher wages are going up. But we're now finding out that all of that is wrong. We created the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization, and all they did was hoard it. Wages have been stagnant for 40 years. They did another stimulus tax bill, as you pointed out. Wages have actually gone down. I'm confused.
Yeah, wages has gone down, and that's one of the interesting, devastating pivots that Fox News has made is from this neoconservative trickle-down, go-to-war ideology, and now that clearly has devastated the country and, areas across the world, we're now seeing this rise of nationalism, right-wing nationalism, and white nationalism, which unfortunately these personalities on Fox News are very friendly towards.
Yeah, I mean, you got Sean Hannity, the guy who's into whatever conspiracy theory you can come up with and whatever apology he can make for Trump. That's where he's going to go. And I've often wondered if he ever was going to wipe the brown off his nose. You've got Lou Dobbs, who just hates every immigrant. I mean, that's you got this Laura Ingraham, who another immigrant hater. And then the one I hate the worst. And if my daughter ever brought him home, I probably would strangle him. I cannot stand Tucker Carlson even a little bit. And I never have been able to tolerate that smug little... I've never been able to tolerate him.
Yeah, well, the thing about Tucker Carlson is that his entire show is about himself and puffing himself up. He does very little reporting of the news. All of his stories are cherry-picked to fit the Trump narrative of immigrants as criminals and takers. And he goes out of his way to elevate fringe and extremist views that aren't being covered anywhere else.
So what do you say to the other side of this? Because, I just had someone, email me a little bit ago. Well, the left, they glorify Antifa. And look, I'm not a huge fan of extremes on any side. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that the problem is this moral equivalency between fascists and people who show up in the street to stand against fascists. And of course, you can have a conversation about what the best tactics are, but these counter-protesters wouldn't be out in the streets demonstrating against white nationalists if the white nationalists didn't feel comfortable taking to the streets. And so another thing that Fox News does is when they're confronted with this issue of the rising tide of white nationalism, they pivot to fear-mongering around groups like Antifa and making them into the story when the reality is that the city of D.C. this past weekend was defending themselves and standing up against racism.
Yeah, I mean, I could not do your job because I understand your job is to watch Fox News a couple hours each night. I couldn't do it. I don't know how much they pay you, but I guarantee it's not nearly enough. But a couple of times where I have watched or I've seen clips to highlight your point was on Election Day a couple of years ago, where Steve Ducey was watching a clip of some Black Panthers at a polling place, and he was hyping it up to where, oh, what's he doing? What are they doing? It turns out the guy was opening the door for a little old lady.
Right. Yeah. So there's always a boogeyman of Fox News. The boogeyman of the recent past is the new Black Panthers, which you just mentioned. But right now it's Antifa, it's undocumented immigrants demanding the basic civil rights that they deserve. And it's all types of people who they use to distract from the fact that they're enabling this right-wing hatred.
Yeah, is there any way to push back on this? I mean, look, I know a lot of white working class folks. I'm a white working class guy. I know people who've lost their jobs. I know industries who have gone away because of bad trade deals, and and the wealth class of this country just going, hey, you know what? We can make more money by moving somewhere else. Is there any way to reach them? Because look, they're struggling. Their anger is real. And what the right has done, what Fox News has done masterfully, is given them the red meat of someone to blame. Is there any hope for them, or are we just do we have to write them off?
I mean, I'm not sure if there are any hope for racists. But I do know that there is hope for the working class. And I think that there is a rising consciousness of the importance of unions and the importance of solidarity for people who are working and demanding a higher wage and better benefits and paid sick leave and all the types of basic decency that is afforded workers across the world, except for in this country. And so I think across racial lines within the working class, there definitely is hope.
Last question I've got for you, because one of the themes that I've seen come out of Fox a lot lately, that even some of my more moderate white working class friends, kind of grab onto, is this idea that the white man is eventually going to be a minority, and whites in general are going to be a minority, and that there's this massive demographic shift to where eventually white people are going to be treated as badly as minorities have been treated in the past. Is that a fair assessment? I mean, because look, I listen to some of this stuff Fox does, and that seems to be a central core issue that even some of the moderates I know have caught on to.
Yeah, so the disappearing white man is a long-standing trope in white nationalist discourse. If you look back to the civil rights movement, even to the second rising of the Klan in the 1920s, there's always this sense that minorities and at one point it was former slaves, then it was the civil rights workers were rising up to displace the white man. And obviously these are people who are just asking for their basic civil rights and a basic fair shot at a decent quality of life in this country. And so I don't think that we have to have the conversation on those terms of, I think we have to wholesale reject the narrative that that the white man is under attack, because all evidence demonstrates that that's just completely false.
There you go, Madeline. I appreciate your time, some thoughts. If you want to check out Madeline's work, she's got a great piece out now, Watching Tucker Carlson Eats at My Soul. That's a great title. We'll get a link out to make sure that folks can take a look at that and share some thoughts. Madeline, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Madeline Peltz, researcher over at Media Matters for America. You can check out their stuff. We'll get links out of that as well. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk.
Taking steps is easy, standing still is hard. Remember all their faces, remember all their voices. Everything is different the second time around.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. Communists, Reds, long have these been the cries of the press and politicians seeking to undermine the labor movement in the United States. Sometimes even labor leaders themselves got caught up in the anti-communist hysteria. And on this day in labor history, the year was 1938. That was the day that the president of the Metal Trades Department of the American Federation of Labor, John P. Fry, gave testimony before the Special Committee on Un-American Activities. It was known as the Dies Committee. Texas Congressman Martin Dies Jr. founded the effort to root out an alleged communist threat in the U.S. In his testimony, Fry alleged that there were 300 CIO leaders who were communists. At the time, the AFL and CIO were two separate organizations. The CIO had split off from the AFL to pursue more organizing in industries like automaking and steel. Even after his testimony, Fry maintained a network of operatives in the labor movement to identify suspected communists. A few days after Fry spoke before Congress, the Chicago Tribune ran a story explaining the perceived communist labor threat. The article declared if the communists in the United States continued to operate as the Communist Party, they would have no influence on American foreign policy in the foreseeable future. But by making themselves leaders of labor and therefore powerful in democratic councils, they can be of immediate value to the Soviets. The paper warned that the communists were hoping to march the U.S. into another European war. The public had little appetite for another major conflict. The charge that the CIO was infiltrated by communists who wanted war took its toll on the radical labor organization, dividing workers by playing into the fears and hysteria of the era.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm going to this battle, take my Union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery for this war is one you're bound to lose. Are you fascists about to lose?
Tuesday the 14th, primary day in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Connecticut, and Vermont. For me, the state to watch, and don't get upset if you live in Minnesota or Connecticut or Vermont. For me, Wisconsin is the state to watch to see who takes on Scott Walker in November. We've had Madeline Mitchell, who I'm a big fan of. He's running. It'll be interesting to see who wins the Democratic primary to take on Walker in November. There's a number of people running. The front runner right now is the state's public education chief, a guy named Tony Evers. Although the polling been very spotty, but Madeline Mitchell is one of the guys you've had on the program here. He's had the support of California Senator Kamala Harris. You have Kelda Helen Royce, a former state assembly member, backed by Kristen Gildebrand, and Wisconsin's big indie band Bon Iver. There are a couple other people in it, but those are the front runners. I'd like to see Madeline. I'd like to see him win that. Also, the big race to see who's going to take on Tammy Baldwin. A couple of crazy Republicans there. The 1st Congressional District, Paul Ryan's district. You've got the Iron Stash and Randy Bryce and Kathy Myers. We'll see which Democrat wins that primary. From what I understand, it's fairly close. Again, not a lot of polling on it. The other part of it is the story of who's going to run in the Republican spot, because Paul Ryan really backdoored the Republicans in that district because they didn't backbench anybody. They didn't bring anybody along figuring Paul Ryan's going to be there forever. He's a young guy. He's got a lot of years left. He's bailing, and there's a bunch of reasons I believe of why he's bailing. One of them, could be time served. Could find him locked up somewhere. But it'll be interesting to see who that is. Now, the 2 Republicans, Brian Stell, who is a local business guy and has Ryan's endorsement. And then there's the right-wing troll, this Paul Nealon, who is just playing, from what I understand, from people who have who know the district, he's just playing crazy. And there's another guy, Nick Police, Army veteran, I guess, first-time candidate. Not much about him. And Jeremy Ryan, a pro-pot candidate. So we'll see what comes out of that. Also, in the 6th Congressional District, Glenn Gotham, he was one of the guys at the front of Act 10 when he was in the state Senate. He was one of the guys who was really one of the horrible ones. He's up for re-election in Congress, and a couple of Democrats running to unseat him as well. And you can go down the list of them. The hope is that Wisconsin becomes that state where I remember saying in 2011 when we were there that this could be the beginning of a wave. That if Walker gets away with what they were doing and there isn't a huge price to pay, that it would sweep across the country. And as we now look back and know, there was the recall election, and the Democrats do what Democrats did, picked a very centrist, Democrat, the one who lost the first time, to run again. They poured a bunch of resources into it, and the Democrats lost the recall election. And what it was, you ask people, looking back, why did you either stay away from the polls because turnout was very low, is because they just had fatigue. They were just beaten and hammered so much that people just repelled. Please, the pain, stop. So this is an opportunity to maybe pivot, take out Walker, and begin to pivot and move us in a different direction. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out in Wisconsin and the other primary states as well. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, download the podcast from the website, or just get the app on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. Thanks so much for tuning in. See you back here tomorrow.
Coming from the You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming like the tide of flood beneath the lunar sway.